seeing the visuals live, and it in your face all the time, it is impossible to turn away from it. So we thought, journalists need a safe space to be able to mourn. We thought that having a safe space for them, and for me and for the rest of us who were organizing it, was important. So that's why we did it, and that's why I did it, and that's a little bit about myself. And yesterday, yeah, the event was out of this world, to be honest. We did not expect this much popularity. And we just want to thank all the organizers, but we also want to thank every single media practitioner who was present, whether they were covering the event or whether they were there to mourn alongside us. We have great appreciation.
What stood out for me, Deshnee, was I'm really sorry that I missed out, but from the visuals that I saw and the feedback that I got from Nasreen Naidu, my producer, and
Mm,
the visuals that I have come across as well, is for me
mm,
what was really amazing is all the pictures of the journalists killed in Palestine, their
mm,
history, who they are, where they come from. And in
mm.
light of what's going on in Palestine right now, the genocide, I'm kind of wondering how much of work did involve for your organization to come across all of this information. The logistics just kind of boggles me, and just how beautifully it was set up. And you've each and every journalist, we hope, has been represented there. All the journalists that were killed so ruthlessly in Gaza and Palestine as a whole. So, how long did it take for you to put all of this together?
Honestly, it took us something like 2 to 2.5 weeks. Um, Social media is an amazing thing,
Mm,
where you can really get a lot done in a short space of time. We had an incredible group of volunteers, like people like myself, and people in the news industry just like me. We were doing this together. And as an organizing team, of course, it's never easy to be able to get something done very quickly in such a short space of time and with such a large group of people, because views are always different, and we try to bring as many journalist perspectives in as possible. If you saw our statement of intent, that was written a few times before we published it, and it really needed input from everybody. But journalists really bandied and rallied with us. They came to the party. They were present in the WhatsApp groups. It really felt like this was an event for all of us, and they really made sure it was. So the logistics, even, I mean, the people who helped us, the marshals, the people who were present, the people who gave us a stage for free, the people who lent us their sound system. It really, like, none of this would have been possible without them. So everything you saw was a product of a group of extremely well-meaning volunteers. We did all of our best, and yeah, it took us a while. It took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, on Saturday, there were a few people in my house, my little flat, who were painting banners and, getting all those little things done. And it took a lot of time and it took a lot of effort, but it was all done together. And yeah, it's amazing, really, to do it with my colleagues.
So, Deshnee, you had this vigil last night in Newtown, downtown Johannesburg, very well attended. It really, my heart was swelling with pride when I saw all of the people there, and from the feedback that I got and the visuals that I managed to view. Um, this was not an event in isolation. There were similar vigils being held all around, in other parts of the country, and I should imagine all around the world. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so like I was saying, the organizers, it's a group of us from different parts of the country. We had one in Durban, one in Cape Town, one in Makanda, and then one in Johannesburg. There were other provinces that also wanted to get involved, but it was very difficult to, in the short space of time that we did it, to get people together. And the reason we wanted to do it on the 28th is because that was the last day that Palestine journalists called for a boycott. They asked for a week-long boycott from work and from buying things. And the 28th of January was the last day for that week. And so we had to move our vigil up so that we could be part of that boycott and be there just to say, we hear you, we see you. And around the country, everybody was on board with it, and the showing in every part of the country was amazing. Makanda got in on the event, I think, Tuesday last week, and they managed to pull together such amazing numbers. It looked beautiful. We will be sharing images and videos of that through shortly in the week. We're just waiting for that to be collated, but it really came out beautiful, and just being able to work across the country has been amazing.
And it's very important that we keep the story of the Palestinians alive on all different platforms with all different
Mm.
groups of people, journalists. And so, in your world of journalism, you need to keep the story alive. Are we going to be seeing more such vigils in the future? And we do know that everybody have other, have got other commitments as well, and it can't happen too regularly. But as regularly as we possibly can. Is that in the pipeline?
Look, we haven't even decided on that as a team. We haven't even spoken about it because once we decided that this is what we were doing, it was just kind of go, go, go. But
Mm.
it all happened last night. We're just going to have like a few days just to settle in. We'll have a debrief maybe this week, and then we'll be able to share any upcoming plans that we might decide to do. But like you said, people do have commitments, so we just have to be mindful of how we do it and the timelines we move forward with should we decide to do more.
And as you've indicated, that obviously internet and these internet, all the different social media platforms are absolutely amazing. So the story of the vigil last night here in Johannesburg hasn't remained in Johannesburg. It has gone viral all around the world, and we're hoping that there's a very strong message is relayed through this vigil here in South Africa. Let me just take you back a little, a year ago or longer. When Shireen Abu Akleh was killed, deliberately, might I add, by the Israeli occupiers, I kind of, that was earth shattering. You thought that
Mm,
this is the first time we hear of something like this.
mm,
It will never happen again because the whole world is
mm.
now obviously aware of the rights of journalists and the protection of journalists. Little did we think that we're going to see something like what we saw unfolding over the past few months. Do you think by these vigils and the noises we make as journalists, and the noises that different civil society organizations continue to make, that it would make a difference?
Um, you know, as a journalist, we don't really see much support, right? And so it's not surprising to me, unfortunately, that kind, Shireen's death and the impact of that kind of dissipated into the world. We are people who are not in front of the camera. We are behind the camera. We are behind the mics. Nobody sees us. They don't know that we are, actual individuals, that people kill us. So it's very hard for people also just to, wrap their heads around that kind of concept. But we do hope that if we stand up more as journalists ourselves, we're able to give ourselves a voice that we don't usually have because we are that conduit between what is happening to the world and how the public receives it. And we are having a lot of conversations, and because we are not the story, you're taught in journalism, journalists are not the story. If something happens to you, no one needs to know about it. But in this case, it is targeted. And if we have the targeting of journalists, we are going to have a media blackout in Palestine. And if we have a media blackout in Palestine, the impunity with which people are able to operate there means that it can only get worse. And so it is up to us to stand up for journalists to make sure that we are informed. Yes, you can argue with the journalist and say you don't appreciate the way you were informed, but at least you know that someone is there to tell you what is going on. And that is the most important thing. If, we can all just be together on that particular thing, then, deaths will not be futile. People's names will be remembered. And the fact that we are protected by international law and are there just to do our job will be remembered. I mean, if a blue press vest doesn't protect you anymore, then what will protect us? Who are we?
Absolutely, and it suits the Western world well, Israel's backers, to muzzle voices like the voice of Deshnee Subramany and everybody that gathered around the country and around the world regarding this vigil, and all the more reason why it's important that we keep this story alive. Let's talk about the issue around captured journalism. It's a huge thing all around the world, is it not? And does that kind of disillusion you as a journalist, knowing that you go out and you fight to tell the truth and put the truth out there in public spaces, and then you have captured journalists who dilute your story or dilute your position, or make your story, which is a very important story that the rest of the world needs to hear, make it disappear?
One of the things that we did tackle in our segment of intent as well was misinformation and disinformation. And that is probably the biggest threat to our industry at the moment. What we are seeing is the more people feed disinformation, and just, if your listeners don't know the difference, misinformation is when you send information that isn't true by mistake. So you don't know what it is, and that you have a WhatsApp message that comes through, you don't know it's true, but you're forwarding it on, as an FYI. So you're not sure whether this information is true or not. Disinformation is the active and intentional incorrect information that is being spread to create a particular idea. And disinformation we are seeing all around. Unfortunately for us, during this conflict and the violence in Palestine, we have seen a lot of media outlets actually, spread disinformation to help their cause. And that is one of the biggest problems, as you said, for us and for our industry. So we are trying to deal with that as head on as possible. We want to speak more about that, because every time something incorrect is shared, and every time something incorrect is believed, our industry, kind of goes through the wire for that. We are the ones who are looked at as if we are captured. This is not to say that there are people who do. They are not people who do anything wrong, that they are not journalists who sometimes can feed into a particular agenda. It happens in every generation. In every kind of story, there will always be a perspective. There will always be a bias. We are human beings. We are not machines. But the important thing is, can we approach our topics with an objective mind? So, of course, as a person, I cannot be objective, but can I approach it with an objective mind? And that is what they teach us in journalism. How do we do that? And then how do you then make sure you are telling the truth without revealing your biases?
Absolutely. And I guess we all, as you've correctly indicated, we're not objective because of our backgrounds, the way we were raised, our emotional state of mind at that particular moment when we're covering a story. And obviously, that's all going to color the way we put out that information. We touched a little bit on social media, and thank God for social media, because had it not been for social media, the world would not have seen the genocide unfolding in Palestine. Very sadly, other stories have now fallen under the radar, like the plight of the Myanmar people, the Uyghur Muslims in China, and just atrocities being perpetrated on the poorest of the poor all around the world. Lots of things are happening north of our borders here in Africa, and all of those stories are either falling by the wayside or just under the radar. How do we keep this very important story of the genocide in Palestine? It has to be kept alive so that people can wake up and get out of the slumber that they're in and start voicing their opinions and making governments hear them and start making a difference. But at the same time, also start putting out the other stories so that people need to understand that there's so much happening all around the world, and we need to be putting energy in other stories as well.
What we call the story mix in journalism is something that we have to do, and we've learned how to do it over the years that we, get trained in, as well as when we work in the newsroom. And the story mix is so important, and it's such a good point that you're making, because a lot of the time, people think that we come in and we do a story and then we leave and then that's it. We've left the story behind, right? And often that does happen. But it's also due to the pressures within the newsroom. Newsrooms are shrinking. No one is supporting financially. It's very difficult to support journalists. National newsrooms are getting smaller and smaller as we speak. There are few journalists in Cape Town versus the journalists in Johannesburg. In Cape Town is such a huge population with such big stories like gang violence that need to be told with people who are focused on that particular story. But because of how funding for journalism is actually, kind of, it's really in a dangerous situation at the moment. I don't really want to speak more of that, but
Yes,
it's in
I
a really
do.
dangerous, yeah.
It impacts on all of us, you and I.
You know, right? I mean, you are community news. You
Yeah.
know the effect of us losing our jobs, of losing funding, of private funders thinking that profits are more important than journalism itself. And what does that do to our industry? It decimates us. What does that do to the stories we want to tell? It cuts it by half. What does that do for us to be able to tell the right story to the public? It actually removes that right from the public because we are not able to do our jobs anymore. So even if we're looking around the world, you're looking at Sudan, the DRC, those people, the journalists there, they are in exile. There are people in the UAE. There are people in Saudi Arabia. They're all running away and they're in exile because they are being targeted and killed. They are being imprisoned as well. And just like you say, how are we going to do the story and why aren't we bringing it, how is the story mix looking? I mean, I don't even think your newsroom has capacity to do 4 international stories. And that's what this kind of story requires, right? But 4 international stories means agency money. It means reporters. It means editors. It means producers. And no one is funding those things. So one of the biggest problems, I think, for us is funding and being able to find a sustainable business model for journalism, whether community or commercial. But it must be found so that we can actually, be able to do our jobs and actually speak out a lot more.
Deshnee, I want to make a comment here. Back in the day, as I was growing up, journalism was seen as such a glamorous, a glamorous profession to be in. You went out, you did the work, you did the digging, you made sure that you tried to balance the story to the best of your ability, tried to get, right of reply if the story was pretty heated or whatever the case may be. And I think a lot of people aspired to be in this profession because it was about telling the truth, very especially in the dark days of apartheid, because we knew that we were only getting one version, and that was the version of, obviously. Giving the version of the apartheid regime, die swart gevaar and all of that. So we never got the true picture because there were so very few journalists from our communities who could go out and tell the true story, to speak the truth to power. So we realized how important the job of a journalist was, is, and still should be. But over time, and I think with the advent of social media, it is diluted because now every second person is a keyboard warrior, is a journalist, is putting out stories. Um, there's a lot of merit in it, but at the same time, it could be very dangerous, and a lot of false narratives can be put out and is being put out by these social journalists who may not even have the necessary qualifications, but that's just by the way. Um, Social media has diluted mainstream journalism as you and I know it, broadsheets, newspapers, and it seems to be even overtaking the space of radio and TV. It has, in fact, people prefer to go to their handheld devices and consume news in little tidbits and hoping and praying that the news that they're consuming are hard facts. So here comes in these social journalists, and you kind of wonder where and how they verify their stories. And it's pretty frightening, is it not?
Yeah. I mean, in any kind of industry, innovation becomes a scary thing unless it is harnessed by the brave, right? And often in journalism, So we can be a little bit stuck in our ways. And in newsrooms, there's been a huge divide between the old guard, can I call it, and kind of the newcomers who believe that social media is a tool. And I mean, to explain, I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I started in the newsroom, I was a digital expert. They thought I fixed the printers. That's what all the journalists did.
Right.
Please can you check my internet? It's not working. They didn't realize that we were actual journalists, that we operate, that this is written journalism just on the internet.
Right.
And this is video journalism just on the internet. They didn't really
Right.
see it that way. And so we have always had this battle, right, to be able to explain to people and bring people into our world to say, listen, social media is a real thing. And we have to be working with it if we are going to make sure that the right information is put out. Of course, we are always in danger, and that's why I talk so deeply about misinformation and disinformation. It is such a big problem in society at the moment where, I have family members who just get those WhatsApps and forward them on, get things from TikTok and just forward them on without us actually checking and verifying. And our job as the public, just as much as it is that of the journalist, is to fact check every bit of information we are getting. Information is moving at a faster rate than ever before. Like I told you earlier, we have managed to do this in 2 weeks. And the only reason we managed to do that in 2 weeks is because of how quickly information can spread these days. So it's incumbent on us as a responsible public, and it is incumbent upon us as a responsible journalism public as well, to be able to fact check everything, make sure you know what's going on, and don't spread things that you don't know is true, because that is where the dirt is coming from, excuse me, and that's where we're having a problem right now.
Okay, I'm going to have to wrap up in a minute or two. I really do appreciate your time. Wonderful talking with you. But we spoke a little earlier on about how in other parts of the world, journalists' lives are at threat. They're either going into hiding, and they then put out their stories from their places of hiding. Because we do know that if their governments do manage to track them down, their fate will be really quite dire. Jamal Khashoggi is one of those people. We do know what the Saudis has done to him. And 3 years ago was when he was murdered, I believe. My timing might be out. It was such a huge story. And journalists, and I guess the general public, sat up and realized the importance of the stories of credible journalism, how important those stories are to keep the rest of the global citizen informed and in tune and truly know what is happening, and not getting a watered down version of a story, or not getting a story that is being colored by the opposition, because the journalist, or because they've captured that necessary space. So these are all the important things we need to bear in mind. What do you tell young social media warriors who wanting to get a story out ASAP, or be the first to put the story out, because it gives them a sense of maybe being in touch, maybe give them a sense of importance, or being the first to have supposedly broken a story?
Mm. I guess my message to them is the same as it is to any other member of the public, because you don't need a degree to be a journalist. Sorry, that is the truth. And often, a lot of managers I've worked with have even said, we're not really looking for journalism as a qualification, but we do need to know that you can specialize. We do need to know that you can write. We do need to know that you can speak. So often people will advise journalists to, rather go and specialize in a particular thing like law, or specialize in science or health, and then you can be a specialist in that as you learn journalism, which is one of the ways people can do it. But obviously that takes a lot of training and a lot of convincing, because like I said, the old guard has a specific way of doing things. But when it comes to young people, I can only implore one more time, please, we are responsible for the impressions we create. The impressions we create have lasting effects. We are now currently sitting in a war, or not a war actually, because it is not a war in Palestine. It is violence in Palestine, and we are sitting there because of the effect of people who think they can just tweet things, right? who thinks they can just share things on Instagram. It is incumbent upon us all to be as responsible as possible because our actions have far-reaching effects. People have been attacked, people have been harassed, people have been bullied because of fake information. It happens all the time. So we really need to be careful because whatever action we put out, we get that right back. That is exactly what happens in the world, and it is the law of karma. It is the law of the universe.
Absolutely. My final question, you speak about facts and how we need to, how we as journalists, or how people who aspire, to be journalists and put out a lot of information out on, social media. Um, how do they? How should they go about fact checking? That's the one thing. We talk about fake news. We also talk about the difference between, and I think this is important, propaganda. How do we know
Mm,
that what we're consuming is outright propaganda? Because people are
mm,
gullible. You and I would think
mm,
twice before we consume something, or say, "Ah, that's a load of rubbish," or "That's propaganda
mm,
from that particular grouping of people," etc.,
mm.
etc. We're able to, maybe distinguish because we've been in the space long enough. But how do
Yeah.
we try and let younger people or other people realize and spot the difference between outright propaganda and fake
Mm.
news for that matter?
Yeah. Okay. So two things there. Media Monitoring Africa, which is a body that assists media and children in media with information, disinformation, and misinformation as well. They have a website called real411.org.za. I was wearing the T-shirt yesterday, and this is a place where you can verify information, and you can check whether a video or an image is true. There is also Africa Check, which is available online as well. You can check with them. You can also submit questions to them, and they will let you know whether that is true. They also have a WhatsApp line, but if you go to the Africa Check website, you'll be able to find all the details for the WhatsApp line where you can just submit things and you will get a daily podcast from them as well that will get some of the more popular fake news that's been doing the rounds. So that's a nice way to also update yourself. If you see something online, always double check that you can find that at a credible news source. If you cannot find verification at a credible news source, it is likely not to be true and you must be cautious of it. Do not share it if you do not know where it comes from and if you do not know that you can verify that information. Trust credible news sources. They have systems in place. They know how to do journalism. They know what they're doing. So if it is on one of their websites, you're able to know, okay, yes, this actually is real. A real journalist has gone out and done the legwork and made sure that this is correct by checking their facts. And the last thing I would like to implore everybody is please, have various news sources. People often will use Twitter, for instance, to get information, but they only follow, let's say, the Reuters agency. So they don't know what AFP is reporting. They don't know what EWN is reporting. They don't know what Salam Media is reporting. And so what happens is you get one source of information, one place of finding a particular story. And if the story you heard about via someone else isn't there, then you might think it's not real, or you might think that news agency is captured. The best way for you to know what's going on is to have various news sources. Make sure you read widely, and it is incumbent upon us to be responsible for the news that we consume.
Deshnee Subramany, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on my show this morning. Once again, congratulations to you and the team for the vigil that you organized last night in downtown Johannesburg. And as you and I spoke earlier on, it's not always possible to have these type of huge events with lots of people attending and obviously showing their support. But we do hope we'll see them at least once a month or so, and just keep the momentum and the story alive of the people of Palestine. And we hope and
Thank
pray
you.
also that when this is over, we hope sooner rather than later, that lest we forget there are other stories, there are other peoples, there are other nations whose stories need to be told as well. And I like what you
Yeah,
said about the mix of stories, how we should do the mix and make sure that all stories of importance do go out. So God bless, dear girl. I think you're doing a wonderful job. And I do look forward to talking with you again in the future.
that means so much. Thank you so much. I'm honored.
God bless. Go well.
Okay, bye
That
bye.
That was Deshnee Subramany. She was the brains behind the vigil that was held in Johannesburg at the Mary Fitzgerald Square in Newtown, Johannesburg. And of course, the call was for all journalists to attend to show their solidarity with the journalists that have been killed in Palestine. And we also know that journalists around the world, maybe not in the numbers that have gone down in Palestine, but in other parts of the world. If a political organization or government or political party don't like what you've been voicing, then if they are powerful enough, and we do know that in a lot of cases, political parties do have a lot of clout, then all I can say is your days may be numbered or have been numbered. And this is simply because you're wanting to put out the correct and the true story, or you're trying to correct the narrative, the false narrative that is being put out by people who want to push propaganda, like Hasbara by the Zionists. So, good people, let's wake up. Let's realize that we need to speak truth to power.